Hey, this is Mark Henry, author of Dancing with Energy, Healing, Magic, and Mysticism, here to talk to you more about the occult and the paranormal. Well, I just wanted to start a new subject, which is ethical considerations and psychic empathy. And I am referencing my last video on psychic empathy, so if you're interested more about the subject, check that video out. With any type of ethical considerations of a particular topic in which I go over, there's always more questions than answers, because ultimately it's really up to you. But that doesn't stop us from posing the questions. So let's go ahead and get into it. Just as a quick review, to review the last video on psychic empathy. So we start with talk about empathy, empathy's ability to put yourself in another person's shoes. To adopt their position, to look at life through their eyes, and a lot of times even feel what they're feeling emotionally or maybe intellectually, saying, hey, I can relate to that. Now, if you've had similar experiences to someone, then sometimes it's much easier to empathize with them, but not always. Sometimes you can learn that vicariously through somebody going through something and seeing them, and then like, that's not going to be for me. So you learn in that regard. Now, psychic empathy is empathy, but you are doing it from a distance. So you're able to connect with people really easy, just by picturing them, imagining them, and it doesn't have to be a one-on-one, face-to-face type of context. And not only can you do that, but you can ask questions and relate to the deeper parts of them. Questions like, well, how does X feel about me? You might get a feeling, for example. Another one would be, how does John feel about a particular topic? And you might get a sense for that. Has Jane done X? Kind of a yes or no context, and you would have to, of course, know what for you is a feeling of yes and what it feels for you as far as no. For me, kind of a light, upward, energetic feeling is a yes, and the opposite, downward, heavier feeling is a no. But to each his own. The sensations come in a lot of different ways, and come in pressure or other types of sensations. Now, and I also wanted to mention again that in order to do this type of work anyway, that you have to, a lot of times, adopt a neutral framework when you're going into it. A lot of times when we're too emotionally wrapped up, and the answer, that emotion can compete with the psychic impressions that we get, and that it makes it harder to sort for what's what. It's kind of like a form of contamination, and then through practice, you probably could work your way up or work your way out of the situation and figure everything out. However, the stronger the emotion, the more the interference, so to speak. So there's a cognitive bias that we can adopt whenever we are doing this type of work, especially when it's something we really want to know. Because if we really want to know it, then there's a strong desire, and then there is that to have to control for. So, the ethical questions. So, when we're talking about ethics, especially with this type of stuff, it's the old adage, and that is, just because we can, should we? And that is the perfect question to start with this type of work. Why did we, ask yourself the question, why did we choose this particular intervention in order to gather information? For what purpose? What is it serving us? And let's imagine, well, if you did it forthright, let's say without doing anything else, ask yourself that question too. Why didn't I go and ask that person the question that I want to know? Maybe you did, and maybe you didn't, and there's different ways of looking at that. Some people would rather go and get feedback from the person, because sometimes, even with our impressions, they can be off, and we need to look at someone else for information. And not only that, but when we're actually interacting with people, we can read body language and stuff like that. So you might get some additional information that you might not necessarily get intuitively. So how might one use this? What if you were a counselor and you were using this to connect with your client, to try to maybe it's like probe them a little bit in order to gather information to help them make new discoveries in their counseling, come up with additional insights. You'll know by the information maybe some questions to ask. You might get some hints and some fragments of information to pose to them to help them move them along in the change process. What do you think about that? Would that be a good use of your time? I've seen other people use this with people that they're trying to communicate with who cannot communicate well. They lack communication skills, or maybe they lack self-awareness of their emotions. So it's not very, so they you may ask them the question, and yet they don't always have that available to them, or maybe they don't understand when you're dealing with emotive information. So what about another scenario? So this person is a pickup artist who likes to engage in one-night stands, so he uses the psychic empathy, or she, in order to gather information about the person, to push their buttons, and work their way into a sexual encounter with them. In other words, maybe create a false sense of connection, even when there's none available. But they might know what to say and what topics to talk about, and maybe even if they were really clever, could talk about some emotions that they have perceived that that person have felt, and talk to them about it like they were experiencing that emotion too. And so what do you think about that? Feel free to post that in the comment about whether you would or would not use that application. How about another one? Going back to the actually talking to people first to get this information that you really want to know. What if you talk with them and something seemed off? Maybe you felt like they were being dishonest, whether through commission, which is lying, or dishonesty through omission, which is not telling the entire truth, which, depending on your viewpoint about dishonesty, that the latter of omission sometimes is sneakier and more, I don't know, negative in a way. Because at least, I guess, if someone's telling you a lie, you'll be able to spot it, false information, better than maybe if there's information absent that you just have no clue what it is. Any case, so back to that example. So does that person have the right to withhold that information from you? I'm sure they would think that it is. I don't have to tell that person everything. You know, that's my business. Secondly, since maybe they weren't completely honest with you, do you have the right to use covert means such as this in order to discover the truth? And would it matter whether it was pertinent to you or not? What if this person was holding on to information that maybe they were seeing somebody else besides you? Let's imagine you two were in a relationship, and y'all had agreed upon a monogamous relationship beforehand, and he or she was seeing other people, and you asked them the question, or her, and they gave you an answer and didn't sit right. Now use the psychic empathy to try to get at clearer picture of the truth. Would that be okay? Well, that's a lot to think about. So I encourage you all to ask these sorts of questions in your work in psychic empathy, and let me know what you think. Please subscribe and like. Leave any comments so we can start a discussion, and I will see you in a future video. Thanks so much.